All right, we got about 2 more minutes and then we'll get started. Today we're talking about communication and talking with clients and talking with your team and just communication in general. So give everybody a few minutes to get in and get settled. And we are going to start on time. We're going to start right at 12 and we're going to be done about 12:45. And I will probably stop a few minutes early. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to put any of the questions that you have in the chat and I'll get to them at the end. So put in your questions whenever you have them and we'll go from there. All right, I'm gonna share my screen. Just going to open up one more screen. I don't know. I have it. Okay. All right, I'm going to share my screen so we can get started. All right. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about powerful client communication. And effective client communication is so important. And we're going to talk today about some essential strategies to enhance those interactions that you have with clients, your team, and even the other people in your life. So why is this so important? When we have clear communication, it builds trust. It sets these foundations for lasting relationships, whether it's through business or your team. It also reduces misunderstandings. When you take the time to make clear communication, to understand those people that you're speaking with, understand what they're saying, and speaking to them in a manner that they understand, it reduces costs. That's how lawsuits happen. When people get sued is because of misunderstood expectations. It also comes down to money. It can reduce delays. And then the other item that it does is it can increase satisfaction with your clients. And that can translate directly to money in your pocket because when your clients are happy, they're a sales team for you. And that is really what we want to do is make our clients happy. We're here to serve them, to help them reach their goals and create success for them. But how do we get there? And that is the communication that we're talking about. This is probably my favorite quote from the book, The Collaborative Way. Now, I belong to a women's business book club, and we have read so many business books. And I can't tell you how many actually are about communication, more than you would think. So this really stood out to me because it says, if you're not being heard, there's something you're not hearing. How many times have you been in a situation where you say to yourself, or you say it out loud to other people, how many times do I have to say this? It really comes down to if you're not being heard, there's something you're not hearing from the other person. So it's time to take a step back and listen. And so, where does that start? It starts with generous listening. It's also called active listening, but this is truly important with clients, team members, family members. And the harder it is to do this is even when it's more important. Now, I'm talking about this and about communication. It's an ongoing practice. This isn't something that you suddenly get good at and then you're done. It definitely comes in ebbs and flows. So there are times when it's easy to do and sometimes when it's hard to do. It's always a practice and something that you have to have a habit of getting yourself into. So generous listening is the place to start. And it goes beyond passive listening. You really are seeking to understand someone else. You are setting aside judgment, and that judgment can be a situation where you would normally say, oh, I know what she's going to say. She always comes up with this excuse. You actually have to listen with curiosity. Listen as though you have no idea what they're going to say and create that space so people can say whatever they need to say. And that way they can feel heard and they can feel valued. Another great phrase from the book, The Collaborative Way, which I highly suggest you read, super easy read, is to slow down to go faster. When you slow down and you listen to others and you hear what they're saying, it allows them to feel valued and then they can get on board with your idea. And when everyone is on board, you can move so much faster. As a visionary, I have issues with speed. I want to move at 100 miles an hour. I want everybody to catch up with me. That's just not the way it works. I have to slow down and I have to listen and I have to understand what other people are saying so that I can move faster. This works with your clients, your team, and your family. Another great book that I've read is The Four Conversations by Blair Enns. And he basically talks about selling and marketing, but this is really important because it's part of the communication that we have with our clients. And this quote I loved, selling is not talking people into things. It's about guiding, questioning, and facilitating the client's best decision. Once again, it's about listening and it's about communicating with the client. So the other thing that second to do after you are listening generously is to speak straight to your clients, to your team, communicate honestly and respectfully. And you need to share your thoughts and concerns directly. Now, this happens all the time in middle school where they get mad at someone and then they run to their gang and they say, "Oh my God, did you see what she said?" And everybody's all mad and you have your whole posse's mad and you feel all good about it. But we can't work like that. Um, And even with clients, even if you're upset with a client, you actually need to talk directly to them and have a conversation with them, because that's the only way you're going to clear the air. It's a it's a way to show respect to your clients, and it actually allows you to create a bond of trust with them. And you have to remember to speak in a way that moves things forward constructively. And when you start to do this with your clients, when you speak in a very straight manner, very clearly with them, you create a culture of transparency. And so one of the questions that we often get is, how do you create this culture of transparency with your team, with your clients? Well, let me just tell you, the leaders model it first. If you are open and respectful, that is what other people will follow. And if you create a situation where it is very clear that disagreement or feedback won't result in a punishment, you need to publicly appreciate when someone speaks up honestly and really gives something that they might be intimidated to say. And then normalize feedback. And I have in here another section where we're going to normalize feedback with the client. So normalize that feedback so that you can continue to have these honest conversations, and they will feel less intimidating the more you do them. You also need to define what speaking straight is. It really, and for me, it's not about name calling or pointing the finger. It's really about having that constructive conversation. And then, a reminder that honesty supports the mission, not an ego. And that's kind of important because we really want to adhere to our missions and what we want to do overall for the company, not for any one person's ego. So another book that we read, actually we're currently reading again, is called Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. And he is a hostage negotiator, or that's how he started out anyway. He started out actually as a police officer who then became a hostage negotiator. And he wrote this great book. And one of the themes in it is this quote. And he says, by repeating back what people say, you trigger this mirroring instinct, and your counterpart will inevitably elaborate on what was just said and sustain the process of connecting. This is something that can be used with your client all the time. It brings in generous listening because you're repeating back and speaking straight. It brings back what did they say, and it allows your client to elaborate on what they just said and give you more information about what they want, what their goals are, what they want to achieve. Why do they want to work with you? If they're having an issue with something, it allows those things to happen. So there are several different times when you are talking with clients where the communication is at the peak of importance. One is when you have the initial meeting with them, when you have that potential client on board, the potential client meeting. And that's when you are most actively using your generous listening and speaking straight. You're going to use it again in the onboarding, because what you're going to do is set clear expectations after you've used that generous listening. You're going to define your deliverables. You're going to define timelines and the boundaries. You have to decide what those boundaries are before you onboard them. Are you going to allow phone calls after 5 o'clock on Friday? What are those boundaries? When I first started my company, I didn't do a lot of boundaries. I didn't break any of those things out. I didn't even define the deliverables when I first started my company. I just figured they knew what they were. We talked about them. but having them written down in a proposal, providing timelines of when those things are going to happen and how often they're going to happen really helps. Then, secondly, understanding goals and pain points and knowing what success means to your client specifically. Everybody has a different idea of what success is to them. So, when you use your generous listening, when you use all those skills, this comes down to writing it down and it being part of your onboarding so that you have those goals that you heard, and here you are clarifying them, reiterating them, and letting them know that you heard it and that is what all this is for, is what we're moving towards. And then identify communication preferences. Now, I never even thought of this until someone mentioned it to me, that they only like to talk on the phone. They don't like Zoom calls. And I thought, really? But that's what they liked. And I have to listen to that. My generous listening is, okay, so when I want to contact you, when I want to communicate something effectively to you, you need a phone call. So that is what I do with that one client. Again, identifying how they want to be communicated with and what is the frequency. If they call me, I'm calling them right back. Is it a Zoom call? Is it a text? How does this communication happen? How often do you want it to happen? And in our company, email frequency is we respond within 24 hours. And that's a company standard. And we tell our clients this at the onboarding so that they have an expectation of what we're going to do and our team knows what we're going to do. So it really clears up any miscommunications and it allows the client to understand what to expect. So you've talked a little bit about, generous listening and speaking straight. And so then how do you utilize those things? These are some best practices that we have found with our clients. So being proactive, I do have to say this is probably our secret sauce. We are very proactive with our clients. And it is a way to tell your client that you care about them because you're actually looking at things to help them with. So, for example, with all of our clients, we are we check through their files on a regular basis, and we might bring up to them, "Hey, there's a charge in here, and we don't know what it is." Or we saw some unusual behavior on your bank account. We might suspect fraud. Or, they need to pay a bill and we know that it's coming due and you haven't approved it yet. So being proactive is really about telling the client that you're thinking about them and that you care about them. And I know that seems like a weird thing to do in business, but it's really what makes the difference. If you think about yourself, that's the way that you feel when someone does that to you. You feel like, oh, wow, they care about me. If you have a doctor that does it, that, you go over a procedure and then the doctor calls the next day and checks up on you, you're like, oh, damn, I like this doctor. They're taking care of me. They actually took the time to communicate. And again, using clear language. This used to be a real issue in our industry where it was very intimidating for someone to use accounting ease when they spoke with a client. And it happens in other industries too. People who are building websites and they start talking about all these things, DKIM and people are like, what? What is that? You really have to make sure that you speak very simply, especially when you're explaining complex situations, because sometimes those situations are the hardest to understand And so you really have to make sure you break them down into a very small pieces so that people can understand them. And then repeat for clarity. So when your client comes to you, and again, this goes back to the generous listening, when your client comes to you and says they have this problem or an issue or something, you can repeat back the key points so that you do understand before you give solutions. If you're anything like me, I am ready to give a solution. Tell me what's wrong, and I'm here to solve the problem for you because that's my superhero. That's my power move. But really, it's going slow to go fast. It's taking that step back, listening to what they're saying, repeating it back to them, and confirming you're understanding what they're saying. And then document everything. This is true across every industry. After your conversation with your client, with your team member, anyone you have this conversation with, document it. Follow up with a written summary and offer some any actions that need to be taken. So in this situation, we have a note taker called fireflies.ai. There's lots of them out there. It is attached to our Zoom calls. And so what happens is it comes in, it records the call, it transcribes the whole entire call, and it will also give us a summary. And then at the bottom, it'll give tasks for each person that is in the call that it gathered from the conversation. We then take that information and send it back to the client or send it to the team member. So this way, there is a reiteration of the conversation that was had and the key points to it. Then it's on that person to say like, oh, wait a minute, I misunderstood this. But it at least allows for written documentation of what happened in the call, maybe even what was agreed to. But it's really important to have that and make it a best practice. So these things, these 4 things should be a checklist of what you need to do about being proactive with your clients, using clear language, repeating back what they say, and then repeating it back in writing and making sure that everything is there and all the information is good. Okay, so sometimes you have to handle a difficult situation. And this is where that generous listening comes in, and it can be really hard at this point. Because sometimes when the difficult conversation happens, it might be that a client is upset with you. And so that is when you will have to have that conversation and you need to listen. And it is absolutely the worst when a client comes to you and says one of your team members did something. And the first thing you want to say is, they would never do that. But you need to listen and take a step back and give them that space so that they can express themselves and that they can say it clearly. And instead of becoming defensive, try to stay objective. Maintain a professional calm, even though you might be feeling differently, that you're not calm, but it goes a long way in diffusing the situation. Because and don't beat yourself up about this. Nobody's perfect. It takes practice. The more difficult conversations you have, seems terrible, but then you get better at them. So try to stay objective and maintain that calm, aloof situation where you're listening, but you're not reacting with emotion. And then most importantly, focus on solutions. So if someone comes to you and says one of your team members did this, you could say, okay, great. Maybe that team member is not a good fit for this situation. We can remove the person, we can train the person, we can have somebody else do it, we can review the task. Maybe it wasn't written out correctly. There's many different things that you can come up with for a solution when there's an issue. So if you can follow these 3 steps when you're having a difficult conversation, and it can be even with a team member. So if a team member's upset about something, they come to you, and hopefully you've created that culture of transparency and they can come to you and talk to you about it. And it will help to stay objective and to provide some solutions for them. And if you can't on the spot, that's another great opportunity to say, let me think about this and get back to you, which is always a good answer. When you don't know, don't be pressured to give an answer. So now that you have some different ways of communicating, there's some tools, there's some tech that will help you get this done. And I can't tell you how many times we've relied on this tech to help us get communication done efficiently. So client relationship management, CRM systems, they are really, really good when you use them. I have listened to many podcasts where people say, oh, yeah, we have a CRM, but they don't use it. Make it as simple as possible. So if you're using HubSpot, we happen to use Go High Level, a Pipedrive, which we've actually used all 3 of these. Pipedrive will actually link with Fireflies. It'll take the conversation and put it in Pipedrive and connect it to that person. So it really does help to have all that information in one place. HubSpot also does it, and Go High Level is getting there. Right now, we actually have to manually put it in. But it is having a client relationship management system is the first step in creating an efficiency around communicating with potential clients, current clients, and any other professional relationships that you have. Using a project management system, a task management system. We've used Asana before. The other one, Trello, Monday.com, those are just examples. We currently use Financial Sense in our own firm because that is specifically built for our industry. But what it does is it tracks all of the tasks that we have and even the task of communicating with the client. It has a task in there that we are to communicate with them every month through email, sending them their reports. And what does that communication include? It gives a list of what we need to include. So it allows us to make that regular cadence of communicating with our clients. And it's a reminder so it doesn't get forgotten. And then there's always direct communication. Now you can use Loom. Loom is where you can record videos. And I just got this communication from my mortgage company. They sent me a Loom video about the escrow account, and they just explained the escrow account, and they actually said you can skip ahead to right here and find out how much your escrow account is. It was really, really good. I was terribly impressed with it. So, and we've used Loom lots of times where we just create a short video for a client telling them, hey, how are you? This is what we're talking about, or explaining something to them. And then you can also do Slack or Google Chats for quick updates. Now you can use those for your Slack is typically used internally, but we have clients that we actually are on their Slack channel. And we use Google Chat inside of our team to communicate. And Zoom is great for face-to-face, Google Meet, Teams, any one of those to have meetings. And that is something you can record those. They can be transcribed. And that allows you to have that information. You can invite in your note taker into the Zoom meetings. So once you know how to communicate, you have the tools. Now you got to create that communication cadence. So you have the onboarding where you establish you establish the expectations and you understand how they want to communicate. The next is to go to what are going to be the regular touch points with your client. Again, it's in your task management system of when to do it. And then it gets recorded in your CRM what the last communication was. Are you going to have weekly emails, monthly emails? Are you going to have monthly meetings, quarterly meetings? I have a client that I have a monthly meeting with. Her and I talk every month, and I communicate with her 5 days ahead of time, send her the reports, send her the agenda. She knows all these things are going to happen. We talked about it on boarding. We have those monthly touch points. And then even in between those things, we're very proactive about sending updates. We share milestones and status reports. When someone hits $1 million in sales, it is something to celebrate. So we always make sure that when our clients hit any milestones that we know are goals, we reach out to them and we are proactive in that. And then I talked about this before, review sessions. So gather feedback and adjust approach as needed. So we got some feedback recently. We have started with a new reporting system. And again, it was in the onboarding. They expected to get an email every month with all their reporting. Well, our client didn't like it and wanted the old reporting. That's great. That was feedback. And we said, no problem. Here's your reports. And then he also mentioned he wanted a phone call. No problem. We're going to call you. We told him when we were going to call, who was going to call, and what the conversation was going to be about. And it's going to be to go over the old reporting and why we changed to the new reporting. No problem. But we want that feedback, and you have to be open to it. And that is where you're going to use your generous listening and really hearing what the client is saying. So this is your communication checklist. What you're going to do is make sure you start with that generous listening, giving them your full attention and understanding what their needs are, and making sure, and this is quite possibly the hardest part of that generous listening, is not having in your mind what the answer is that they're going to give. It is to listen with curiosity and then have a clear understanding of what is being said. Are you repeating back what they're saying, confirming that you're aligned in your expectations, and making sure that you have communicated effectively what you're saying and that you understand what they're saying? And then prompt follow-up. Always follow up after a conversation. I have a phone call this afternoon. After that phone call, I'm going to sit down and write out everything that I remember, because on my phone call, I actually can record it, but you should always ask permission if you're going to record it. I actually have that ability on my phone to record it. Most people don't like it, so I tend not to use it. But I will sit down right after the phone call, write down everything that was said, and go back to them. And I will go over what was in the conversation and what next steps are. And then this last one, client satisfaction. Does the client feel heard, valued, and respected? This is where you can utilize client surveys. There are so many places out there that allow you to do this. There's MailChimp, there's Constant Contact, Google Forms, anything that you can send out surveys to your clients and ask them, how did they feel about this? Do they feel as though their expectations were met? Any one of those things. And the more regular that you do this, the better feedback you're going to get. Your clients are going to expect it. We were working with a vendor one time that every time we communicated with them, we immediately got an email that asked, how was your experience with us? How would you rate it on a scale of 1 to 10? When we work with QuickBooks, every single time we call them, we get a survey and it says, would you recommend us? So there's the Net Promoter Score. There's things you can do to really find out client satisfaction. Also, if you are generously listening, you'll hear it. So these are these are all the things that we have found to be very effective when communicating with clients. There we go. Someone asked, is your client retention longer as you've become more proactive? Yes, I truly believe it is. And one of the things that we have gotten feedback on is that, and one of our longest clients actually just said this to us the other day. They said that they were so impressed at how much effort we put into it, into the relationship with them. I truly believe it works. We have very, very little turnover in our clients, and everyone on the team is trained to communicate like this. It's not just me. Everyone that speaks with clients is trained to speak this way. As actually, as a team, we just did a book club and we did the collaborative way. And each person on the team had to take one section and do a little presentation to the rest of the team about different chapters. So it really was good. And then someone else asked, do you find that many clients reply to the survey? So the average rate of return for any survey is very small. But because it's your clients, and if you're having regular communication with them, they should be pretty good about responding. We do get responses. I don't say it's not 100% for sure, but we are trying to move towards kind of what Intuit does, where after we have a call with them, that we can send out the survey. And so that way it's fresh in their mind. Did we have that conversation? Did we resolve it? Are you happy with our services? Things like that. So that hoping that will be something, because we've done the mass survey where we send it out to all the clients, and it isn't a huge return on that, but that's actually really common that you don't get a big return on it. Any more questions? All right. All right. I want to thank everybody for coming, and don't forget to sign up for our next webinar. The next webinar is about talking with your accountant for tax planning, what you need to know before you go. When you get, we're going to post this on our YouTube channel, and everybody here that registered is going to get a recording of this. And you will also get a link to sign up to our next webinar so that you can know what to talk to your accountant about and feel really confident about having that conversation and understanding your finances. All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming. It was a pleasure. And if you ever have any questions, you can always email me at elisa@firststepsfinancial.com. Take care, everybody.